You know how sometimes a single line from a person can stick in your head like a bad jingle? For me it was, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. That line came from my personal tormentor, the queen bee of our neighborhood, and self-appointed god of the HOA, Karen Granson. I never thought I'd end up at war with a woman who wore pearls to mow her lawn, but here we are. My worst nightmare didn't come covered in monsters or burglars. It came wearing a pastel cardigan and carrying a clipboard. It came in the form of someone who believed rules were spiritual doctrine, and power came from printed bylaws. But before I tell you how I turned Karen's little power trip into a Smurf-colored disaster, let's rewind. The Hilton County Community Clubhouse always smelled like bad coffee and worse decisions. Beige walls, stale air, and fluorescent lights that flickered like they were begging to die. It was as lifeless as a bureaucrat's soul. I sat slumped in a creaky metal chair that whined louder than my patience could handle. My wife, Sam, sat beside me, her attention locked on her phone screen, her fingers moving with habitual sharpness. She was probably checking the perimeter cameras again. Not paranoia, just experience. Nobody ever wanted to attend an HOA meeting. They were punishment disguised as civic duty. Miss 3 in a row, and one day you'd come home to find a pink flamingo army in your neighbor's yard and a new bylaw against unapproved decorative fauna. But tonight was different. Even the air had that tense electric weight before lightning strikes. At the front of the room stood Karen Granson, ruler of this suburban kingdom. Blonde helmet hair, smile as polished as her front step brass, and eyes sharp enough to slice through excuses. Her perfume reached you 3 chairs away, flowery with a hint of expensive entitlement. She tapped the microphone twice. The sound made everyone in the room flinch like it might summon thunder. "Thank you all for coming," she sang, syrup sweet but fake enough to turn your stomach. "Before we get to general business, I'd like to discuss a new initiative for community safety and property value preservation." Sam nudged me under the table without looking up. I muttered, "Brace for the Community Beautification Police." She smirked discreetly. Karen raised a clipboard as if it held the 10 Commandments. "In light of increasing clutter and potential hazards, the board proposes a new bylaw, Bylaw 7C, routine garage integrity checks." Even her tone sounded capitalized. A low murmur swept through the 30 homeowners like wind through dry grass. Dave from 2 houses down, retired butcher, permanently confused, raised a trembling hand. What exactly does that mean, Karen?" She smiled like a spider noticing a fly. "Excellent question, David. It means that once each quarter, a certified board member will conduct scheduled inspections of all garages to make sure they comply with our community standards. That means no excessive clutter, no unapproved modifications, no unauthorized business activities." My blood started to simmer, slow, steady, dangerous. Not because of mess inspections, but because of what it really meant. Power. Karen wanted control over the one part of our lives she couldn't touch, our private spaces, and I wasn't about to hand her the keys. Before my brain caught up, my hand was already in the air. Her smile tightened just a bit. She knew me. John Winters, House 114, tomato planter. Door painter, chronic breaker of sacred HOA laws. "Yes, Mr. Winters?" she asked, the title stretching like taffy between her teeth. I stood up. The chair squealed in protest. "I've got a statement," I said loudly. "The answer is no." The room froze. Even the ancient AC stopped rattling like it didn't want to interrupt. "I'm sorry," Karen said slowly, pretending innocence. "I'm not sure which question you're answering." "It's not a question," I said, stepping forward, shadow cutting across her clipboard. "You're not stepping into my garage. Not next quarter. Not ever." A few people glanced up from their shoes, little flickers of agreement they'd never admit having. Most just stared at the floor, praying Karen wouldn't see them nod. Her eyebrows arched. "Mr. Winters, this isn't about you. It's for community safety. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear." And there it was. That line, the spark. I laughed under my breath. "I'm not afraid, Karen," I said quietly, letting my voice drop into that tone Sam calls my "please don't push me" gear. "I'm protective of my home, my privacy, and my right not to have a petty dictator with a clipboard snooping around my business. My garage is for my car, my tools, and the junk I don't talk about." "It's not an annex of your little empire," someone gasped. The word tyrant seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Karen's face hardened for just a second, a flash of raw anger, before she buried it under a mask of syrupy calm. "I'm sorry you feel that way," she said coolly, "but the community's interests outweigh one individual's peculiar preferences. All in favor of Bylaw 7C?" Of course, her hand-picked minions raised their hands first. Others followed, trembling. terrified of fines or of being on her list. Abstaining was just cowardly agreement. The motion passed faster than a grown-up talking to a toddler. Sam tugged on my sleeve. "Let's go, John," but I didn't move. Our eyes met across the room, mine full of defiance, hers full of victory. She smirked that cold little smile that said more than words ever could. "You challenged me. Now you'll pay for it." Outside, the night felt different, colder. Even the soft hum of streetlights buzzed like interrogation lamps. Sam squeezed my hand. "You really did it this time," she said softly, not angry, almost proud. "I'll beef up the network security when we get home," I nodded. The war hadn't started yet, but the battlefield was already chosen. The next days were too calm. The whole neighborhood felt blank, washed in that eerie stillness before a storm. I found myself glancing through the blinds more than usual, that creeping sense of being watched tightening in my gut. "Paranoia," Sam said at first. "Instinct," I countered. Karen Granson didn't let public humiliation slide. She plotted. She schemed. The wheel in her mind was already spinning, grinding toward payback. The first signs were small, barely noticeable. A package marked "delivered" that never arrived. The morning paper tossed halfway down the street instead of on our porch. Harmless if it wasn't so obviously intentional. Little jabs to remind me she was still there, still watching. "She's playing mind games," Sam said one evening, her eyes glowing in the light of her monitors. Her part of the living room looked like mission control. Screens everywhere, cords coiled like snakes, soft blue glows in the dark. "It's working," I muttered, watching the clean perfection of Karen's lawn across the street. Sam cracked her knuckles like a hacker in an action movie. "Let's find out the facts." She pulled up the external camera feeds. We had coverage on every side of the house. 2 on the front, 1 angled at the driveway, 1 over the backyard. She scrolled through 3 days of recordings at high speed, and sure enough, there it was. Karen's spotless white SUV, prowling past our house again and again. 4 times Monday, 6 on Tuesday, once parking at the end of the block for 20 whole minutes before leaving. "She's not just driving by," Sam said, voice low. "She's surveilling us." A chill moved through me. "So I'm not crazy." "Not technically," she replied with a half smile. "But it's targeted. Classic intimidation." We replayed another day's footage, and that's when something new appeared. A man we didn't recognize, walking slowly down our sidewalk, head turning toward our front yard. He didn't do anything suspicious, just walked. But when he passed our house, he slowed down. His head turned toward our front yard. He seemed to be looking at the gas meter on the side of the house. He paused for a few seconds, then kept walking. "Who's that?" I asked. Sam zoomed in, but the image was too grainy to get a clear look at his face. "I don't know. Could be anyone, but it felt wrong. Why would anyone be interested in our gas meter?" And then it hit me. A jolt of ice water in my veins. My mind flashed back 3 weeks. We'd had a new central air unit installed. The contractors had been here for 2 days to give them access while we were at work. They had put one of those little contractor lock boxes on the gas pipe with a spare key to the front door inside. They were supposed to come back and get it, but they never did. I'd completely forgotten about it. "The lockbox," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I was already moving, grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and heading for the side door. "John, what is it?" Sam called after me. The key, I yelled back. I fumbled with the lock on the side gate and hurried to the front of the house, my heart hammering against my ribs. The little gray lockbox was still there, hanging on the pipe. It looked untouched. I punched in the code the contractor had given me. The face of the lockbox popped open. It was empty. The spare key was gone. Fresh pry marks scuffed the lockbox face. Sloppy work by a pro. I stood there in the dark, the beam of the flashlight shaking in my hand. It all clicked into place. Karen's surveillance. The strange man looking at the side of the house. She hadn't hired him to intimidate me. She'd hired him to get that key, to pop open that cheap little box, take our key, and probably make a copy. He would have put the original back and we'd never have known. But he must have been interrupted. Or maybe he was just sloppy. He just took it. She had a key to my house. The thought made me physically ill. My home, my sanctuary, the one place in the world where my family was supposed to be. Safe was compromised. My protective instincts went into overdrive. A roaring fire of rage and fear. This had crossed every line imaginable. This wasn't about bylaws or garage clutter anymore. This was a direct personal attack. I stormed back inside, slamming the door behind me. "She has a key," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "That son of a took the key from the lockbox." Sam's face went pale. She immediately turned to her main computer, her fingers a blur. "The front door has a smart lock," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "It logs every entry keyed or coded. She brought up a new screen, a long list of dates and times. Here, she said, pointing. Yesterday, 2:14 p.m. manual key entry attempt. Failed. My blood ran cold. Failed? The copy must have been bad, she said. Or the guy who made it was an amateur. It didn't work. But she knows that now. She knows she needs a better copy. It wasn't a relief. It was a warning. She had tried to get in. She had stood on my porch with a key to my home in her hand, and she had tried to open my door. She failed this time. But Karen Granson was not a woman who accepted failure. She would be back, and next time her key would work. We had to assume she already had a working copy. The question of how far was too far had just been answered. There were no more lines to cross. The line had been drawn, crossed, and then stomped into the dirt. Karen Granson trying to get into my house was a declaration of war. I had no intention of losing. The old John, the world-weary guy who just wanted to be left alone to grill burgers and watch the game, was gone. In his place was a version of me that was running on pure, uncut protective rage. My house was my fortress, and its walls had been breached. It was time to build better walls, and maybe a moat, a metaphorical moat, filled with something deeply unpleasant for anyone who tried to cross it without an invitation. Okay, I said, pacing the living room floor like a caged bear. She has a key. We can change the locks, but that's just defense. That's waiting for her next move. I'm done waiting. Sam was already steps ahead of me, her face illuminated by the glow of 3 different monitors. Changing the locks is step 1. Step 2 is proving she's the one doing this. We need undeniable proof. We need to catch her in the act. She swiveled in her chair to face me, a glint in her eye that I knew well. It was her. I have a beautifully devious plan, look. We need to let her think she can get in, she said. We need to bait the trap. My anger began to cool, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. She was right. Just stopping her wasn't enough. She had to be exposed. We had to rip her power out by the roots publicly. And for that, we needed to catch her red-handed, or as it would turn out, blue-handed. My first stop was the internet, where I spent hours researching non-lethal legal in our state home deterrence. I wasn't looking to hurt anyone, as satisfying as the thought might be. I was looking to humiliate. I was looking for something that would leave a mark. Something that screamed, I was here and I shouldn't have been. I found it in a product used for bank security. A high-potency, non-toxic, industrial-grade fabric dye. It came in a variety of obnoxious colors, but I was drawn to a particularly vivid shade of cobalt blue. The description promised it was stubbornly persistent on fabrics and skin for several days. Perfect. The next day, I was at the hardware store, my cart filled with a strange assortment of items. A small plastic bucket, some thin fishing line, a couple of eye hooks, and a factory bottle of washable, non-toxic cobalt marking dye concentrate. No paint. The cashier gave me a weird look. Big art project, he asked. Something like that, I said, redecorating. Back in my garage, my sacred, uninspected garage, I got to work. I was a decent carpenter, a tinkerer by nature, and this was the most satisfying project I'd had in years. The plan was simple, almost cartoonish in its elegance. I would mount the bucket on a small spring-loaded shelf just inside the top of the front door frame. A nearly invisible tripwire made of the fishing line would be strung across the bottom of the doorway, connected to the pin holding the shelf in place. When the door opened, the line would pull the pin, the shelf would tip, and whoever was standing in the doorway would get a surprise shower. It was beautiful. Sam, meanwhile, was fortifying our digital defenses. She installed 2 new high-definition cameras on the porch, hardwired into a dedicated recording server with a battery backup. One was obvious, mounted right over the door. The other was hidden inside a fake sprinkler head in the flower bed, giving us a perfect low-angle shot. Doorbell cam, porch cam, and the sprinkler cam. Timestamps synced to the second. We need every angle, she said, running cables through the wall. We're not just catching her, we're producing a movie. The final piece of the puzzle was the legal one. I wasn't an idiot. I knew setting a trap, even a non-lethal one, could be a legal gray area. So I covered my bases. I printed a new sign on a huge piece of white plastic sheeting. In big, bold red letters, it read, "Private property, no trespassing. All unlawful entries are prohibited and will be documented. Violators will be met with non-lethal deterrence." I used 4 heavy-duty bolts to mount it right next to the front door. It was ugly assin', but it was impossible to miss. I also filed a report with Hilton County PD and wrote the case number on thieferage. No one could claim they weren't warned. With the trap set and the sign posted, the house felt different. It was no longer just a home. It was a fortress waiting for a siege. We didn't change the front door lock. That was the bait. We wanted her to think her key still worked. Every night, we'd come home and check the tripwire. Every morning, we checked the camera footage. For 3 days, nothing. The quiet was starting to get to me again. The waiting gnawing at my nerves. I was starting to think maybe I'd misjudged her. Maybe she'd given up. On the fourth day, a Tuesday afternoon, I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when my phone buzzed with a notification from Sam. It wasn't a text. It was a link to a live camera feed. My heart leaped into my throat. I clicked the link. The screen filled with a crystal-clear image of our front porch. And standing there, looking smug and self-satisfied, was Karen Granson. She was holding her stupid clipboard and wearing a crisp, blindingly white pantsuit. She looked left, then right, checking to see if anyone was watching. She didn't see the little black dome of the camera staring right at her. She didn't see the fake sprinkler head aimed at her feet. She reached into her purse and pulled out a key. My key. The trap was set. The cameras were rolling, and Her Majesty was about to step into my foyer trap. All we had to do now was wait for the splash. My hand was shaking so hard the phone screen blurred. I took a deep breath, leaning against the kitchen counter for support. This was it, the moment of truth. Sam sent a text message that just said, "Showtime." I could feel the grin in that one word. On the screen, Karen Granson was a portrait of smug arrogance. She held the key up, glinting in the afternoon sun like it owned the place. She gave our new notice passing sign a dismissive sneer as if the rules were merely suggestions for other lesser people. She clearly thought the sign was just a bluff, a desperate act from the man who had dared to defy her. She had no idea she was about to become the star of a very short, very colorful film. She slid the key into the lock. My heart hammered. What if the lock was sticky? What if the key didn't turn? But it did. We heard the faint, sickeningly familiar click of the tumbler turning, even through the phone's speaker. The door knob twisted. She pushed the door inward. For a split second, nothing happened. The door swung open a few inches, revealing the dark entryway behind it. Karen took a confident step forward, her expensive leather shoe crossing the threshold of my home. Her foot snagged the fishing line. The motion was instantaneous, a beautiful piece of simple physics in action. The line pulled the pin. The spring-loaded shelf, freed from its restraint, tipped forward. The bucket, filled with 1 gallon of highly concentrated, non-toxic, personality-staining cobalt blue dye, tilted over the edge. Time seemed to slow down. The blue liquid poured out in a thick, perfect arc. It wasn't a splash. It was a deluge. It hit her square on the head and shoulders. The pristine white pantsuit vanished under a tidal wave of blue. It stains clothes for days, not skin. Petty, not cruel. Her perfect blonde helmet of hair was instantly saturated, turning a shocking, vibrant shade of smurf. The dye cascaded down her face, over her clipboard and onto her shoes, pooling on my porch welcome mat, which now ironically read, "Welcome to our home," in a spreading puddle of blue. The camera hidden in the sprinkler head captured the look on her face in glorious high definition. It was a silent movie of emotions. First shock. Her eyes went wide, her mouth forming a perfect O. Then confusion as her brain tried to process what was happening. And finally, as the cold, sticky liquid soaked through to her skin, came the rage. It was pure distilled fury twisting her features into an ugly snarl. She let out a shriek that was so high-pitched it probably shattered windows in the next county. She staggered backward, slipping on the now slick porch. Her arms flailed, sending blue droplets spattering against the siding and the newly posted sign. The clipboard, her symbol of authority, fell from her grasp and landed with a wet slap in the puddle. The papers inside instantly ruined with a giant blue Rorschach test. The whole event, from the door opening to the scream, took less than 5 seconds. Sam, in her infinite wisdom, had set the cameras to record in a continuous loop. So, we had it all. She immediately saved the clip from multiple angles and uploaded it to a secure cloud server. Evidence secured. The aftermath was even better than the event itself. My comic relief neighbor Nate, a retired gentleman who spent most of his days tending to his prize-winning petunias, was outside with his watering can. He had witnessed the entire thing. We saw him on the driveway camera. His jaw dropped. His watering can fell from his hand, and he just stood there, frozen for a full 10 seconds. Then he slowly, deliberately turned around, walked back into his house, and shut the door as if he had just witnessed something so magnificent and terrifying that he needed a moment to process it. Karen, meanwhile, was having a full-blown meltdown. She was sputtering, trying to wipe the dye from her eyes, which only smeared it further across her face. She looked like a villain from a children's cartoon. She looked up, her eyes finally focusing, and she saw it. The main camera mounted right above the door she had illegally opened. The little red light indicating it was recording was on. Her rage momentarily vanished, replaced by a flash of pure cold panic. She knew she'd been caught. She'd been played. She'd walked right into a trap that was not only humiliating, but also perfectly documented. She pointed a dripping blue finger at the camera. "You!" she shrieked, her voice. "You will regret this, Winters. You will regret this." She turned and squished her way off the porch, leaving a trail of bright blue footprints down my walkway and onto the pristine sidewalk of our quiet suburban street. She got into her white SUV, smearing blue all over the driver's side door and the leather seat. Anne peeled out of the neighborhood with a squeal of tires. Inside my kitchen, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. It came out as a laugh, a deep, loud, uncontrollable belly laugh. Sam came out of the office, her face split by a massive grin. "Did you see it?" I gasped, wiping tears from my eyes. "It was beautiful," she said, holding up her phone. "And it's already trending on the Neighborhood Watch social media page. I titled it, 'Local HOA President Has a Case of the Blues.'" The video was an instant local sensation. The comments were a glorious flood of laughing emojis and stories of people's own run-ins with Karen. We had done it. We had caught her, humiliated her, and exposed her. For a few hours, it felt like a complete victory. But as I watched her car speed away on the camera footage, replaying that final moment, I saw the look in her eyes. It wasn't the look of someone who was defeated. It was the look of someone who had just found a new, more vicious reason to fight. The real war was about to start. The viral video was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was deeply, profoundly satisfying to watch the clip of Karen's blue baptism make the rounds. The shot in Freude was delicious. On the other hand, it pushed a clever, petty woman into a corner. And a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. Her public humiliation didn't chasten her. It fueled her. Their retaliation was not subtle. It was a blunt instrument of bureaucratic and physical intimidation designed to break us. The first volley came through the mail slot. It was a thick envelope from the Hilton County HOA. Inside was a stack of violation notices. There was a $500 fine for the unapproved alteration to the exterior color scheme referring to the blue dye splattered on our siding. There was a $750 fine for creating a hazardous condition on a common walkway for the blue footprints she had left. And my personal favorite, a $1,000 fine for harassment of a board member, which was so laughably false it would have been funny if the total bill hadn't been over $2,000. "She can't be serious," I said, fanning the papers out on the kitchen table. "This is insane. We have video proof she was trespassing." "It's not about being right, John," Sam said, her voice tight. "It's about making our lives hell. She'll bury us in paperwork and legal fees. She's using the HOA's money to fight us." That was just the start. Thorough escalation came 3 nights later. It was just after midnight. The house was dark and quiet. Suddenly, everything went black. The lights, the television, the hum of the refrigerator, all gone. A power outage. I fumbled for my phone. It screened blindingly bright in the sudden darkness. I checked the neighborhood outage map. We were the only house on the street, the only house in a 5 mi radius without power. Before I could even process what that meant, a low hum started up from the basement, and the emergency lights Sam had installed in the hallways flickered on. The backup generator had kicked in. Sam was already at her command center, which was now running on battery backups and the generator. "The power line to the house was manually disconnected at the street box," she said, pointing to a diagram on her screen. "Someone had to physically open the box and pull the breaker." The next morning, I called the power company. The cheerful woman on the phone told me there was a work order to disconnect our service. When I asked who authorized it, she said the request came from the property management company for our address, the HOA. I filed a fraud report. The utility locked our account to in-person ID only and flagged any future change requests. Karen had impersonated a property manager to have our power cut in the middle of the night. This was no longer petty. This was dangerous. What if we didn't have a generator? What if it was the middle of winter? The following night, she came for our internet. We were trying to watch a movie when the screen froze, then went to a buffering symbol. My phone lost its Wi-Fi signal. Sam's face hardened. "We're being jammed," she said. She grabbed a strange-looking device with an antenna from her desk and walked through the house. "The signal is strongest near the front yard." I grabbed the big mag light from the kitchen and we went outside. In the thick Alia bush near the porch, tucked away near the roots, was a small black box with a blinking red light, a portable high-powered Wi-Fi jammer. It was military stuff, not something you pick up at a surplus store. We bagged it with gloves, logged the find on video, and reported it to Hilton County PD and the FCC hotline. This took resources. This was planned. While I was pulling the device out of the dirt, Sam grabbed my arm. "John, look, a man was walking down the street directly towards our house. He was big, built like a refrigerator with a shaved head and a sour expression. He was wearing a jacket with a Gus's Handyman Services logo on it. Can I help you?" I asked, stepping in front of Sam. I held the heavy flashlight like a club. He stopped at the edge of our lawn, just outside the glow of the porch light. "I'm here to inspect the illegal modifications you made to your front porch," he grunted, jerking a thumb towards the front door. "Bard President sent me." "It's 1 in the morning," I said, my voice flat. "And you're on private property. You need to leave now." "I've got a work order," he said, taking a step onto the grass. "I'm not leaving until I've done my inspection." This was it. The physical intimidation Karen had sent her goon, my hot-headed nature, which I usually kept simmering on the back burner, started to boil over. "You take one more step onto my lawn," I said, my voice low and shaking with anger, "and I'm going to introduce you to the police." He just laughed, a short, ugly sound. "The police? Karen's got them on a leash. Now get out of my way." He lunged forward, not to attack me, but to push past me, to get to my porch, to my door. My protective instincts took over. I wasn't going to let this mountain of a man near my wife, or my home. I planted my feet and shoved back hard. He was strong, but I had leverage and a whole lot of adrenaline on my side. He stumbled backward, surprised by the resistance, his face twisted into a snarl. "You put your hands on me?" he growled, balling his fists. For a second, I thought he was going to swing. We stood there face to face on the edge of my property. A silent, tense standoff. Behind me, I heard the distinct sound of Sam racking the slide on the shotgun we kept for emergencies. Muzzle down, finger clear, we didn't point it at anyone. Gus heard it too. His eyes flickered past me to the doorway, and his bravado evaporated. He took a slow step back. "This isn't over," he snarled, pointing a thick finger at me. "Karen always gets what she wants." He turned and lumbered back down the street, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there for a long time, my heart pounding, the Wi-Fi jammer still clutched in one hand. The game had changed completely. Fines, power cuts, and now a hired thug on my porch at 1 in the morning. This was a full-scale campaign of harassment designed to either break us or force us out. But they had made a critical mistake. They hadn't broken us. They had just made us angry. And they had no idea how resourceful a very angry man and his even angrier tech-savvy wife could be. The scuffle with Gus was the final straw. The world-weary part of me that just wanted to be left alone was officially dead and buried. Karen Granson wasn't just trying to annoy us anymore. She was trying to intimidate us into submission with threats of physical violence. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. The question of how far is too far was a dot in the rearview mirror. Now the only question was, how do we end this for good? We were sitting in our command center, what used to be our cozy home office, and the mood was grim. The fun of the blue dye traff had evaporated, replaced by the cold reality of our situation. "She's using a proxy," Sam said, typing furiously. "This Gus character gives her plausible deniability. We can't prove she sent him. So, we need to connect them," I said, the gears in my head starting to turn. "We need to catch them working together. And we need to do it without them knowing we're watching." Our current camera system was good, but it was vulnerable. As we'd seen, if they cut the power and jammed the Wi-Fi, we were blind. That had to change. Sam, my brilliant, beautiful, and slightly terrifying wife, already had a plan. "We're building a new network," she declared. "A ghost network." For the next 2 days, our house was a whirlwind of technological warfare preparation. Sam ordered a set of new cameras. These weren't Wi-Fi based. They operated on a 4G cellular signal, each with its own internal battery pack that could last for 72 hours. They were small, easily hidden, and completely independent of our home's power and internet. One went into a birdhouse I mounted on the old oak tree in our front yard. Another was disguised as a rock in the flower bed. A third, with a powerful zoom lens, was placed in the attic window, giving us a perfect sniper's eye view of the entire neighborhood. Next, she built the ghost network. She set up a new encrypted mesh Wi-Fi system. Unlike a traditional router, a mesh network used multiple nodes that all talked to each other, creating a web of connectivity. If one node was jammed or went down, the others would automatically reroute the signal. It was self-healing and incredibly difficult to disable completely. Our digital fortress was now complete. It was time to set the bait. "She's after something inside the house," I reasoned. "The garage checks, the key. She's convinced I'm hiding something. Let's give her something to find." The plan was simple, but it relied on Karen's own greed and obsession. I went to a big box store and bought a cheap fireproof safe. It was heavy, black, and looked very official. I brought it home, and in the garage, with the door wide open for anyone watching to see, I proceeded to make a show of putting things inside it. I wrapped a few bricks in bubble wrap to give them a sense of importance. I added an old broken laptop and a bag of spare bolts to give it some weight and make it rattle just right. The final ingredient was the real genius of the plan. Tucked inside the padding of the safe, I placed a tiny GPS-enabled RFID tracker. It was no bigger than a quarter with a battery that would last for a month. and it would ping its location to Sam's phone every 60 seconds once it was activated. The trap was almost ready. We just needed to get the word out. That's where neighbor Nate came in. I caught him while he was trimming his hedges the next morning. "Nate," I said, leaning over the fence conspiratorially, "I need to ask you a favor. Can you keep an eye on our place? With all this craziness going on, I've had to, I moved some important things home, from the bank. Just until this all blows over." Nate's eyes went wide. "Oh my." "Of course, John. My lips are sealed." I knew Nate's lips were about as sealed as a screen door in a hurricane. He was the neighborhood's most prolific and good-natured gossip. The news that John Winters was keeping valuables in a safe at home because of the HOA drama would be all over the street by lunchtime. Karen would hear about it. It was, as Sam had called it, Karen Nip, a locked box she wasn't allowed to open, rumored to be full of treasure. She wouldn't be able to resist. That Friday, we made a big show of leaving for the evening. We told Nate we were going out for a fancy date night to celebrate our anniversary, which wasn't for another 6 months. We got dressed up, got in the car, and drove away, waving cheerfully. We drove around the block, parked on a side street with a clear view of our neighborhood, and Sam pulled up the live feed from the new 4G cameras on a tablet. The Wasp, a small, quiet drone she usually used for photography, was hovering silently at 200 FT, giving us a bird's-eye view. The house looked quiet, a perfect target. We sat in the dark car, the glow of the tablet on our faces, and we waited. For an hour, nothing happened. I was starting to get antsy. "Maybe she didn't take the bait," I whispered. "Patience," Sam said, her eyes glued to the screen. "A predator always circles its prey before it strikes." At 9:47 p.m., a dark windowless van without any logos rolled quietly into the neighborhood and parked a few houses down. The engine cut. My breath caught in my throat. A minute later, the passenger door opened and a large figure emerged. Even in the grainy night vision of the camera, the man's lumbering gait was unmistakable. It was Gus. He moved quickly, sticking to the shadows, his eyes scanning the houses around him. He slipped into our backyard. A few moments later, the camera covering the back of the house showed him using a crowbar to pry open the kitchen window. He disappeared inside. We sat in stunned silence, watching the feeds. We couldn't see inside, but we knew what he was after. 5 minutes later, the back door opened. Gus reappeared, but this time he wasn't empty-handed. He was struggling, half-dragging, half-carrying the heavy decoy safe. He wrestled it across the lawn and heaved it into the back of the van. Thaven's door slid shut and it pulled away as silently as it had arrived. My first instinct was pure rage. He had broken into my house, but then Sam held up her phone. On the screen was a map of our neighborhood, and on that map, a tiny blue dot was blinking. It was moving away from our house, heading towards the main road. "Got him," Sam said, a grim smile on her face. The tracker was live. The trap had been sprung. Now all we had to do was follow the breadcrumbs. The adrenaline from the break-in carried us through the night. We didn't sleep. Our office became a war room. Sam projected the live map from the RFID tracker onto the main wall. The little blue dot, our stolen safe, was on the move. I had a big whiteboard set up, the kind you see in detective movies. And I started scrolling notes, drawing lines, connecting the dots of Karen Granson's criminal enterprise. This was no longer just a feud. It was an investigation. The first piece of evidence was the tracker itself. The safe didn't go to a storage unit or Gus's house, as we'd expected. Instead, the blue dot traveled across town and came to a stop in a commercial district known for its bail bondsmen and sketchy all-night check cashing places. It stopped moving at a specific address. Sam typed it into a search engine. The result came back instantly. "Honest Abe's Pawn and Loan. We buy anything." "He took it straight to a pawn shop," I said, a slow, grim smile spreading across my face. "He couldn't even wait a day. He's not just a thug. He's a dumb thug." Morning. We parked across from Honest Ias before it opened. The place was a caricature of a city pawn shop with iron bars on the windows and a flickering neon sign. We watched as a greasy-looking man with a ponytail unlocked the front door. We gave him 30 minutes to get his coffee brewing, and then we went in. The shop smelled of dust and desperation. The man behind the counter, presumably Abe, looked at us with bored, suspicious eyes. "Can I help you?" I put on my most pleasant, non-threatening smile. "Good morning. We're here about a safe. A black Sentry brand safe brought in late last night by a very large gentleman." Abi's face went blank. "Don't know what you're talking about." Sam pulled out her phone and placed it on the counter. She played a short, crystal-clear video clip from the hidden birdhouse camera. It showed Gus's face as he approached our house. Then a clear shot of him hauling the safe across our lawn. "This is a recording of a felony burglary," Sam said, her voice calm and professional. "That safe is our property, and it contains a GPS tracker that led us directly to your front door. Now you have two options. Option 1. You cooperate with us. We get our property back and this problem goes away for you. Option 2. We walk out that door, call the Hilton County Police, and they come here with a warrant and security footage of you receiving stolen property. Your choice. Abe swallowed hard, his eyes darting from the phone back to our faces. He made the smart decision. He led us to the back room, and there it was, our decoy safe, sitting on a shelf next to a dusty saxophone and a collection of power tools. Abe logged a property receipt for the safe and burned his camera footage to a second drive for PD. It was beautiful. A clear shot of Gus dragging the safe in, and an even clearer shot of the cash transaction. We had him cold, but Gus was just the muscle. We needed to tie this directly to Karen. That's when Sam remembered the die trap video. We went home and pulled up the original high-resolution file. Watch the clipboard, she said, zooming in on the exact moment the blue dye hit Karen. We watched it in slow motion, frame by frame. The blue liquid didn't just hit her. It splattered everywhere and Wes saw it. A clear, distinct spatter of cobalt blue landing right on the corner of the fancy leather-bound daily planner she was holding. It was a unique starburst-shaped stain. It was a fingerprint. That's good, I said. But how do we prove she still has it? Sam grinned because our dear HOA president is a narcissist who loves social media. She pulled up the HOA's official Facebook page. It was a nauseating collection of photos of Karen cutting ribbons, planting petunias, and handing out oversized checks. Sam scrolled back through the posts from the last week, and there it was, a photo from a charity bake sale 2 days ago. We screen-saved the post with timestamp and URL hash for the case file. Karen was standing there, smiling her fake smile, and in her hand was the leather planner, and on the bottom right corner, partially obscured, but still visible, was a familiar-looking starburst-shaped dark blue stain. We had her. The final piece was the human element. We had the digital and physical evidence, but we needed to show a pattern of behavior. We needed to prove that we weren't her only victims. I spent the next 2 days walking the neighborhood, knocking on doors, and just talking to people. At first, no one wanted to speak. They were afraid of retaliation, of fines, of having their own power cut. But then, I spoke to Mrs. Gable, a sweet elderly widow who lived on the next street over. When I told her what had happened to us, she burst into tears. She told me a story about how Karen had insisted on an attic insulation inspection last winter. Goosh had come gone into her attic alone and discovered a host of dangerous code violations that had to be fixed immediately. He charged her $3,000 for a few hours of work that probably involved kicking some dust around. She was too scared and embarrassed to tell anyone. Mrs. Gable's story was the key. Once she agreed to write down what happened, others started to come forward. There was the young couple fined $1,000. Because their toddler's tricycle was left on the driveway for 2 hours. There was the man who was forced to tear down a brand new deck because the stain he used was, according to Karen, too rustic. We gathered half a dozen signed notarized statements. We laid it all out on the whiteboard. The burglary on camera, the tracker data leading to the pawn shop's security footage, the blue stain on the planner linking Karen to the scene of her documented trespassing, and now a chief of witness statements detailing a pattern of extortion and intimidation. It was an airtight case. We could have gone to the police right then, but Sam stopped me. The police will file our report, she said, her eyes flashing. This will get tied up in the courts for years. She needs to be removed from power now. She pulled out the thick binder of HOA bylaws, and I think I know how to do it. She pointed to a dusty, forgotten clause. Article 9, emergency removal of a board member. It required a petition signed by 25% of the homeowners to force a special recall meeting. It was time to take the fight back to the clubhouse. Getting 25% of the homeowners to sign a petition against a sitting HOA president is like trying to nail jelly to a tree. People are afraid. They don't want to get involved. They're worried their trash cans will suddenly be declared non-compliant, or their prize-winning roses will be cited for being excessively thorny. But fear is a powerful motivator, and Karen Granson had spread a lot of it around. As it turned out, so is righteous anger. When people heard Mrs. Gable's story, something shifted. Intimidating me was one thing. I was a stubborn guy who could handle himself. But extorting a sweet old widow, that was a bridge too far, even for our timid little community. The signatures came faster than we expected. We needed 40 signatures. We got 62. With the signed petition in hand, I felt a surge of confidence I hadn't felt in weeks. We weren't just victims anymore. We were leading a rebellion. Sam drafted the official notice for the emergency recall meeting citing the bylaw and the purpose of the vote. We posted it on the community bulletin board right over a flyer for Karen's upcoming patriotic pet parade. The meeting was set for the following Thursday. The night of the meeting, the beige community clubhouse was transformed. It was packed, standing room only. The air, usually stale with boredom, was electric with tension. People who never came to meetings were there standing along the walls, their arms crossed, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. Sam and I took seats in the front row. Neighbor Nate gave me a thumbs up from across the room. Mrs. Gable was there sitting with a few other ladies who looked equally nervous and resolute. Karen and her two bored cronies, a pair of siphons named Barry and Linda, sat at the head table looking flustered. She clearly hadn't expected this kind of turnout. She banged the gavel, her face a mask of forced composure. "Welcome to this unscheduled gathering," she began, her voice tight. "Due to a frivolous and frankly misguided petition, we are legally obligated to hold this meeting. Let's get this nonsense over with." I stood up. "According to the bylaws, Karen, the petitioners get to speak first." I walked to the podium, the sheath of papers in my hand feeling as heavy as a stone tablet. I could feel every eye in the room on me. "My name is John Winters," I started, my voice steady. "And for the last month, my family has been targeted by our HOA president. We have been stalked, harassed, and robbed. And we are not the only ones." A wave of murmurs swept the room. Karen shot to her feet. "That is a slanderous accusation. You have no proof." "Oh, I have proof," I said calmly, looking out at the crowd. "But first I want to talk about why we're here. We are here because this board has forgotten who it works for. It does not work for Karen Granson's ego. It works for us, the homeowners. And when the board uses our money and our rules to intimidate and extort its members, it has broken our trust." "Point of order," Karen shouted, banging her gavel. "This is not a trial. State the reason for their call or sit down." I ignored her. I turned to Mrs. Gable. "Mrs. Gable, would you be willing to share what happened to you?" The old woman, shaking slightly, stood up from her chair. In a quiet but clear voice, she told the entire room about the attic inspection, about Gus, about the $3,000 she paid him in cash, because she was afraid of what they would do if she refused. When she finished, the room went still. Then from the back, someone yelled, "Shame!" The room erupted. People started shouting their own stories about the fines, the threats, the constant feeling of being watched. It was a dam of frustration breaking all at once. Karen's face was pale, her composure cracking. She looked cornered, desperate. That's when she made her move. She nodded to the back of the room. A huge figure detached himself from the shadows by the door. It was Gus. He started walking towards the podium, towards me. "This meeting is out of control," Karen yelled over the noise. "This man is a threat to the board's safety. Gus, escort Mr. Winters out." Gus was a professional bully, but he wasn't used to a room full of angry homeowners staring him down. He hesitated. He looked at me, then at the crowd, then back at Karen as if looking for confirmation. "Get him out of here," she shrieked. Gus reached for my arm. Before he could touch me, a cane shot out from the side and hooked around his ankle. It was neighbor Nate who looked as surprised as anyone. Gus, not expecting a tripwire at shin level, went down like a sack of potatoes, crashing into atable of lukewarm coffee and powdered donuts. Chaos ensued. Barry, the crony, tried to help Gus up and got shoved by Dave, the meek neighbor from the first meeting, who seemed to have found his courage. Linda, the other crony, started screaming. It was a full-blown suburban riot. I just stood at the podium watching it all unfold. The recall was no longer in question. Karen had lost the room, lost control, and lost her power. The vote was officially scheduled, as per the bylaws, to be held in 10 days at the annual neighborhood block party. As the chaos subsided and people started to separate, Karen pushed her way through the crowd until she was standing right in front of me. Her face was a terrifying mask of pure, undiluted hatred. Her eyes were burning. "You think you've won?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous so only I could hear. "You have no idea what's coming for you, Winters. This is not over." It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. And looking into her eyes, I knew she was more dangerous now than ever before. Karen's threat hung in the air for the next 10 days, a toxic cloud over our neighborhood. There was a sense of dread mixed with anticipation. The block party, usually a day of bouncy castles and friendly chatter, was now shaping up to be a full-blown showdown. We knew Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. Her threat wasn't just hot air. She was planning something. A final desperate move to crush the rebellion and cling to her little throne. We had to be ready. This time we weren't just defending our home. We were coordinating an entire neighborhood. Sam's home office became the official resistance headquarters. We held secret meetings after dark with neighbors huddled in our living room, planning our countermove like we were plotting a revolution. The plan we came up with was audacious, theatrical, and if it worked, would be the final nail in Karen Granson's coffin. It was Sam's masterpiece. The theme of the operation was simple, more blue. "She wants to play dirty," Sam said, pointing to a map of the block party layout on our whiteboard. "So we're going to drown her in it publicly with 100 witnesses and a dozen cameras rolling." The plan was a large-scale version of our original door trap. We identified 4 houses that had second-story porches overlooking the central neighborhood where the voting table would be set up. The families in those houses, all victims of Karen's reign, eagerly volunteered. I spent 2 days in my garage building 4 identical remote-controlled tipping bucket mechanisms, an upgrade from my original fishing line rig. Each bucket was filled with 5 gall of the same cobalt blue dye. They were hidden behind the porch railings, completely invisible from the ground. Sam linked all 4 mechanisms to a single wireless trigger, a big red button that would sit on a table at our barbecue station. But the real genius was the media component. Sam didn't want this to just be a neighborhood spectacle. She wanted it to be undeniable public record. She set up a private live stream accessible by a unique URL. She gave that URL to the local news outlets, a few popular community watch bloggers, and every single homeowner in the association, telling them to tune in at 2 p.m. sharp for a special announcement regarding the HOA recall vote. She had cameras everywhere. The Wasp drone would be hovering overhead. Tiny hidden cameras were placed in tiki torches, bird feeders, and even a gnome in neighbor Nate's garden. We would capture the events from every conceivable angle. On the day of the block party, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a plastic picnic knife. The smell of barbecue was mixed with the scent of impending battle. Kids were laughing in the bouncy castle, oblivious to the drama about to unfold. The voting table was set up in the middle of the street, manned by a neutral third party we'd hired. Retired city clerk Ms. Rios ran sealed ballot boxes and a public tally sheet. At 1:55 p.m., Karen arrived. She wasn't alone. She was flanked by Gus and her 2 board cronies, Barry and Linda. They moved like a pack, their faces grim and determined. They weren't there to vote. They were there to intimidate. They started walking through the crowd, staring people down, whispering threats, trying to scare them away from the ballot box. I watched from our grill, flipping burgers, my hand inches from the big red button hidden under the table. Sam was at her command post inside, monitoring the live stream and communicating with the bucket teams on the porches via discreet earpieces. All cameras are live. Her voice buzzed in my own earpiece. Live stream has over 500 viewers and climbing. Wasp is in position. Bucket teams are ready on your signal. Karen and her goon squad were making their way towards the voting table, their final destination. They were right in the center of the neighborhood, directly under the 4 hidden buckets. The kill zone. They're in position. I whispered into my wrist, feeling like a secret agent on my mark. I waited for the perfect moment. Karen reached the voting table and slammed her hand down on it. "This entire vote is illegal," she screeched, trying to seize control. "This is a sham." That was my cue. I looked at Sam through the window. She gave me a sharp nod. I pressed the big red button. 200 FT above, the Wasp's camera zoomed in. On 4 separate porches, solenoids clicked, pins retracted. 4 large buckets tipped forward in perfect, beautiful synchronization. 20 gallons of cobalt blue dye rained down from the heavens. It was a blue monsoon. Karen, Gus, Barry, and Linda didn't even have time to look up. They were instantly, completely, and utterly drenched. The crowd gasped, a single collective intake of breath. Then, for a beat, there was silence as everyone processed the sheer, magnificent absurdity of what they were seeing. 4 blue-wrenched villains standing in a massive, spreading puddle, looking like they had just murdered a family of Smurfs. Then the laughter started. It wasn't just chuckles. It was a wave of cathartic, aorious laughter from 100 people who had been living under a thumb of fear for too long. Karen stood there sputtering, blue dye dripping from her nose. Gus just looked confused, as if he couldn't understand how the sky had turned against him. As the laughter rolled through the crowd and the live stream viewer count shot into the thousands, 2 Hilton County police cars rolled silently up the street and stopped at the edge of the neighborhood. Detective Miller arrived with DA-approved arrest warrants based on our earlier filings. I'd pre-briefed him days ago, told him 2 p.m. might get loud. I walked over and handed him a flash drive. "Everything you need is on there," I said. "Backups, your copies are already in evidence. Video of the break-in, the pawnshop transaction, witness intimidation, extortion, notarized statements, the whole 9 yards." Miller looked at the 4 sputtering blue-soaked figures, then back at the flash drive in his hand. He shook his head and smirked. "John," he said, "you don't do anything halfway, do you?" They cuffed a shrieking blue-stained Karen right there in the middle of the street in front of all her neighbors and thousands of viewers online. It was over. We had won. But as they put her in the back of the police car, she twisted around and locked eyes with me. There was no fear in her eyes. There was no remorse. There was only a look of pure, uncut hatred that promised this was far from finished. The neighborhood dubbed it the Blue Pulse. With Karen, Gus, and the cronies soaked in dye and buried under evidence, Hilton County's HOA power grid snapped overnight. While Karen was being booked, the recall vote was nearly unanimous. The old board was out. An interim board came in, and to my weary surprise, I was on it. First motion, void every fine Karen's board issued in the last year, and refund every dollar from reserves. Passed. No objections. The cheer in that beige clubhouse shook the ceiling tiles. Months later, after hearings, filings, and discovery, the criminal case finally landed. Gus flipped, trading testimony for a lighter hit. Barry and Linda caught civil suits from a dozen residents. Mrs. Gable led the line. They sold, vanished, and won't be missed. Karen faced stacked witnesses and charges and took a plea. Time in county, probation, fines, and a 5-year ban from any HOA board in Hilton County. We'd done it. We fought the system and won. We took a petty little empire apart, piece by piece. The neighborhood changed fast. Fear drained away. Neighbor talk filled the gap. Hedges got trimmed together. Grills got shared. Potlucks appeared like mushrooms after rain. Ironically, the block party that nearly became a riot glued the block back together. Then came the tribute. Little blue-painted garden gnomes sprouted on lawns. We called it the Gnome Guard. Nate started it. We followed. A month later, 100 tiny smiles watched our street. It was a joke and it was a vow. We look out for each other. Life eased. Sam and I finally got the quiet we moved here for. Coffee tasted better. The grass grew without a warning letter. I could tinker in my garage without the threat of an integrity check. I thought about the road here. Traps, cameras, petitions, the sting, and felt a tired pride. I didn't ask for a war, but if one shows up at your door, you finish it. We protected our home and our people. That sits deep. A few months later, sunset laid gold over the neighborhood and its army of blue gnomes. I pulled the mail, swung the box shut, and felt something tacky on the handle. I looked down. Cobalt blue smeared my thumb. My stomach dropped. I leaned closer. On the metal handle, perfectly set in the still wet smear, was a single clean fingerprint. Not mine. Too small for Gus and Karen. Karen was locked down, accounted for. The envelope slid from my hands and slapped the driveway. The air felt colder. The blue wasn't random. It was a message, a calling card. Somebody else had been here. Someone tied to the mess we thought we'd mopped up. Someone with access. We'd cut off the head, but missed a fang. The war was over. We'd won the peace. The street felt healed. But that one cobalt print said one more round might be waiting on the bell. I went inside. Sam was already at her desk, fast as a blink. "Mailbox cam," she said. We rolled it back frame by frame. She paused, zoomed, and tapped the screen. "That print wasn't accidental," she said. "It was placed." I looked at the row of tiny blue gnomes in our window's reflection, each one grinning in the last light. Game on.